For chapters 8 and 9, chapters 10 and 11 in the third edition, you will have this narrated PowerPoint presentation with incorporated questions. You will find these questions in an attached file and some of them in the quiz for this chapter. I suggest that you go through this PowerPoint first, and then hopefully much of the reading will be familiar and make more sense. This presentation will include why study populations and how we study populations. In particular, what factors influence where populations live, their distribution, how much of them there are, the abundance, and how they move from one place or one population to another, which is called dispersal. So why study populations? As we discussed in the first week, a key goal of ecology is to uncover facts that determine where populations are located and how populations change in size over time. Population ecology can help answer questions important for assessing the risk of extinction of a population, like the panda, and learn what to do to protect a species from extinction. Other applications of population studies include fighting pest populations, such as the ticks we encountered talking about complex life histories, or managing fish and game species, such as the salmon we also encountered talking about life histories, and finally predicting human population growth, as we will discuss later. In this unit, we will focus on protecting species from extinction and in particular apply everything in the text to one local example, trying to uncover why the population of southern sea otters off the California coast is endangered. But actually, that has to do with fishing, managing fish and game species, and with pest populations, and with human population growth, as you will see later. True to our tenet that ecology is the study of how everything hangs together. There are lots of questions to be answered if we want to figure out why southern sea otters are endangered. The evolutionary history of the species, their life history traits, changes in the abiotic environment and in the biotic environment, and our main topic today, population dynamic. But let's take a step back and first define what a population is. A population is a group of individuals of the same species that live within a particular area and interact with each other. Well, that sounds simpler than it is, but the book will tell you a little bit more about the difficulties to know what really interaction means and so forth. So when trying to understand the otter population, our first question is, where is the California population? And as you can see in the slide, they are from just about Half Moon Bay down to a little bit north of Santa Barbara. That's their distribution. And the next question is, how many otters are in the population? The abundance. And as you can see in this slide, the sea otter population has changed over time. We have data here from 1985 to 2009, and you can see that there was a steady increase, but that it seems to be leveling off now, and this trend has actually held for the last 5 years. When you look at abundance and range together, you come up with the density of an organism, which is defined as the number of organisms per unit of space. And what you can see here, that sea otters are concentrated in particular regions right here around Santa Cruz or Pismo Beach in Southern California. Distribution and abundance both depend on habitat suitability, and habitat suitability depend on the abiotic factors and the biotic factors present in that range. So here on the left side, you can see that the sea otters are actually really, really close to the coast. And that has something to do with shallow water and rocky substrate, while on the right side, you can see biotic factors. There is kelp that they need to put their young in so that they don't get swept away. And you can see also their favorite food source there in the middle, which is sea urchins. But you can also see that there are interactions between abiotic factors and biotic factors. If abiotic factors, for example, were the substrate, that they are rocks, that's what kelp needs to hang on to. So, again, everything hangs together. The book's case study in chapter 8 is related to sea otters and looks at their favorite food, sea urchins, and their favorite shelter, kelp, and how sea urchins are a biological factor limiting the distribution of kelp. In summary, the main biotic factors affecting habitat suitability are the presence of food and shelter and the absence of predators. There is a relationship between sea urchins and kelp, and that is actually the book's case study in chapter 8. This slide shows what happens after the experimental removal of sea urchins to the abundance of kelp in the experimental plots. You can see here in the y-axis the kelp density per square meter, and on the x-axis you can see what the experimenters did. So before sea urchin removal, you can see that there was no kelp at all. And after they removed the sea urchins, 1 year later, there were 20 kelp per square meter, and 2 years after the removal, there were more than 100 organisms per square meter. So that suggests a causal relationship between kelp abundance and sea urchin abundance, but of course it doesn't prove it. Further studies have to be done. Estes et al. Took these research on the relationships between kelp and sea otters and sea urchins a step further. They did their studies on a different population of sea otters in the Aleutian Islands, which you can see here on the left side, are a group of islands off the coast of Alaska. What they noticed is that before 1990, there were no killer whales predating on the sea otters, but that killer whales really began eating otters in the 1990s. And they were interested in the effect on this whole system. What you can see in this slide, again on the y-axis you have otter abundance as a percentage of maximum abundance, and you can see that before in 1972 this was set at 100. So something drove slowly the population of sea otters down, but you can see in 1990 when the killer whales started eating otters, there was a very sharp decline. And for the other populations, so they're on the other islands, you can see that the decline really started right around that 1990. So no surprise, we introduce a predator and the number of sea otters goes down. What you see in the next slide is the effect on sea urchins. You have the urchin biomass here on the y-axis, and again you have the years 1972 to 1990 on the x-axis, and you can see that the urchin biomass was very low before 1990, and after a little recovery period, you had over 300 organisms, in grams. You had more than 300 grams per quarter of a square meter. So that's a lot of sea urchin, which are very light. And again, you're not surprised, since less otters can eat less sea urchins, the sea urchin population should recover. And the next slide now shows the total kelp density in individuals per, again, a quarter of a square meter. In 1972, there was nothing. 1985, nothing. And you can now see how the kelp density went up in the 85. That was because sea otters recovered and kept the sea urchin population down, and that in 1997 it was almost again down to 0. So again, these seem pretty clear-cut relationships, but there are a lot of other factors. For example, why didn't we have kelp in 1972? But this can give you an idea of what's going on in a population, and you have to do further studies to figure out, the details. So abiotic factors and biotic factors, of course, influence each other. So coastal upwelling, as we discussed in chapter 4, has an impact on how much food is available. And how much food is available then affects the habitat. And El Niño has an effect on coastal upwelling, and so has an effect on food. Another example would be that an abiotic factor, the presence of this rocky substrate, is important for the shelter and for the food that sea otters need, because kelp needs something to hang on to. That's why they are concentrated in the coastal area, because they cannot hold on to anything and make it to the light in the deep ocean. So we have seen how habitat suitability can affect distribution and abundance of otter populations. Habitat suitability, though, is not the whole story, because there is a lot of suitable habitat, for example, north of San Francisco, where otters are not found. That can be explained by the history of otters.